eBay Motors and Fox Racing welcome you to episode 62 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week, Motorcycle Global's Michael Uhlarik questions the conventional, and by that I mean the Western view of the Bajaj takeover of KTM. By Michael's reckoning, KTM is very much the junior company and Bajaj the powerhouse. But before we take the leap, a word from those who make the Lowdown possible. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything, brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger, Defend, and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis fully seam-sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing and D30 CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing. Michael, there's a misconception about the KTM and Bajaj union. So let's just jump right into it. What's at play here?
Well, I think a key element that is sometimes being misrepresented in particularly English language motorcycle press is this idea that, KTM has all this wisdom and experience and technology, and that Bajaj, and before this was announced, when there was speculation that it might be CF Moto, which is of course a Chinese company, that they were gaining all this wisdom, all this experience, all this technology. I think that's really wrong read. And what I mean by that is it goes back to this idea of, well, it's not around here, therefore can't be any good. Most people who have been writing about this expansively about in the moto press are familiar with KTM and Husqvarna, and we've had this 30-year run where this Austrian-based specialty boutique motorcycle company did, as your last guest said, a superlative job of marketing. They convinced millions of people to spend between 20 and 40% more for a marginally better motorcycle that they could get from a Japanese mainstream OEM. And ready to race, and we're cutting edge, and we bleed orange, and it's brilliant. The tie-ins with Red Bull, and it's extreme, and they did just a fantastic job of making the brand appealing. But the reality is that KTM is overwhelmingly a motocross motorcycle company. The vast majority of their products were small displacement, 400cc, 500cc and below, and the luxury products, and they were luxury products, the 790 based products, the 690 based products, the 1 liter and up products that they sold, whether it was street or enduro or adventure, were really niche products aimed at a very small sliver of the marketplace. And that most of the technology contained within KTM vehicles were developed by suppliers. And that's fine. That happens. That's a completely normal situation in the motorcycle and automotive world. They're not setting up their own software business. They're partnering with a Continental or a Bosch or whomever, what we call a tier 1 supplier. So when the company went bust, and Bajaj, as the almost majority stakeholder before the problems, was clearly the front runner and the protected creditor that was going to have the first right of refusal. People around US and to a lesser extent in Britain and Australia, but still in the Anglosphere of motor journalism, were like, well, these poor small emerging market companies, they're going to benefit so much from all this technology. It's like, that's not an accurate read. Bajaj was the senior partner in this relationship before the bankruptcy. Bajaj was the one that could leverage volume and manufacturing. And while their products were maybe not, perfect in terms of, quality, They certainly were no worse than KTM, whose crankshafts and camshafts, pardon me, and other problems, were surfeit. So, there is this narrative that Bajaj is getting the better end of the deal, and it's really the other way around. It's that if just a cursory glance at the numbers says this. Bajaj is 10 times the size of KTM in terms of volume. 10. They've had double-digit growth for a good portion of the last 10 years. They're highly profitable. They're the world's largest three-wheel manufacturer. They have much greater manufacturing capacity and engineering capacity. And what's not being reported regularly is that Bajaj has partnered with other tier one legacy OEMs like Triumph, to manufacture, small displacement motorcycles. And let's be clear, small is not really small. It's middle displacement, which in the US is thought of as small. So, under 500. So really, Bajaj is the more mature business, the more technologically and financially mature business. And they just swooped in and rescued a junior partner that got in over its skis.
What actually is Bajaj? And this seems like a rudimentary question, but what actually are they buying in buying 3 letters and a tagline? I mean, why? And they paid a lot of money for it,
Yeah.
not an insignificant amount of money. So what are they getting?
Well,
Is it just cachet?
It is. And I would like to, a lot of our listeners are our age or maybe even older. And this is roughly analogous to what happened in the 1980s, the mid to late 1980s. There were cries then too of protectionism. Japanese automobiles and motorcycles were simply better quality, more sophisticated, more advanced. They offered a better experience for the consumer. They were longer lasting, and they were more aggressively priced. And so European governments and then the United States itself started crying foul and saying, not unreasonably, that there were some unfair subsidies happening on the Japanese side. And the public reacted very strongly. And in order to, assuage the situation, governments said, well, you can't sell your products here without tariffs or some kind of, other barriers. So what did the Japanese do? They bought European and American companies in order to circumvent these problems and set up branch plants. In the automotive world, this is how you have American Honda starting to assemble Goldwings and Kawasaki putting Z1000s together in the US. Yamaha acquired MBK, a small French moped manufacturer that was, on the ropes. And that's how Yamaha Motors Europe got its first domestic, manufacturing facility inside the EU. And, Honda, had a relationship with, my mind just, not Gas, but
Montesa.
Montesa, yes. And, to this day, it's called Montesa Honda. And, proud Catalans are like, well, we had to show them how to build a trials bike. It's like, yeah, you go on thinking that, So this is an old strategy, and it's a successful strategy. And in the end, everybody wins. You get what are, local production, and you educate a local workforce, and eventually, Honda also set up a plant in Italy, etc. So what does Bajaj get? It gets a immediate entry point into large-ish scale manufacturing inside the European Union of plus premium labels that they can apply to products which have quite considerable product market fit. Like, people want these things, maybe not as much as, KTM thought, but significant. They can easily start shilling 250,000 EU manufactured motorcycles, inside the EU, which is terrific. And what they bring to the table is the ability to balance a spreadsheet, to pay and negotiate with suppliers, But they also acquire a lot of dead weight. They acquire, an engine development facility, which is probably not worth very much at this point. Some of the other constellation of brands within the peer KTM group, like, Gas, the aforementioned, there's not really any value there. Frank, and this is the part that I think ADV Rider um, listeners will not want to hear, but Husqvarna is almost worthless. I know it's highly desirable, but it's highly desirable to a very small number of people. It's analogous to Buell. Everyone loved Buell, but no one loved it enough to walk into a dealership and buy one. And Husky is like that. And the reputation is not amazing and outside of dedicated enthusiasts. And they really, really just are reskinned KTM products. So even the enthusiast is a little disappointed. And you read that a lot in the comments when you mingle with adventure and off-road motorcyclists. They know it's nothing really that special. So there's a lot there for Bajaj, but it's not what people have been reporting. It's not prestige. It's not technology. It's a gateway to manufacture, 400cc urban commuters at large volumes profitably inside protected markets.
The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. When we spoke before, we we made the smart-ass point that when you buy MV Augusta, you've lost your mind, and only bad things can happen. And that's happened a few times with MV. In fact, I think MV sold for €1 a few times. You assume the debt, of course, which is extremely high.
Yes.
But is this inevitable that companies? It seems that when the going is what? Let me put it this way: what do companies do wrong? It's like when the going is good. Is it just human greed? Because of course Harley bought MV, and then Harley with Buell, which never made any sense to me. Your radical geometry sport bikes with pushrod engines in Harley shops, and every Harley shop I ever spoke to hated them passionately because they just wanted more, wide glides and tour glides and electric glides and all that sort of stuff. So is that just the human frailty that these companies act as irrationally as you or I might act in just acquiring these other brands?
Yes. The short answer is yes. KTM failed because of the colossal ego of the men at the top. And, again, it's story time. We've seen this before in Europe. It's scary how much the KTM rise and fall mirror almost exactly the rise and fall of Aprilia. Today, many people know Aprilia as a teeny tiny sliver, a little boutique Italian motorcycle company that makes a handful of, interesting but expensive and hard to service, maintain motorcycles. If you're watching this in India, you think of Aprilia as MotoGP or cheap scooters, like really nasty cheap scooters, rebadged, rebranded, bottom of the barrel Piaggio products. But once upon a time, Aprilia was a little regional bicycle maker that in 15 years went from making its first moped to winning a world motorcycle Grand Prix championship, 125 championship, and then rose to be Europe's largest motorcycle OEM, making at its peak 330,000 vehicles, which is almost to the 1,000 unit identical to where KTM peaked, 330. And I went to the last year. I mean, I went to all of them, but I went to the EICMA show, the Milan Motorcycle Show, the big show in 2003, which was the last year that Aprilia was independent. And you could smell the death. They had overreached. They had decided to build too many vehicles on too many diverse platforms. They were in MotoGP. They were in 250 World Championship and 125cc World Championship. They had gone into motocross. They were like, They were Europe's largest moped manufacturer. They decided to make a giant moped like a Yamaha T-Max. Like, they expanded too quickly. They bought Moto Guzzi. They bought La Verda. Do you see the similarities? We're going to buy these heritage brands and bring them into our fold. We're going to have economies of scale. They built an e-bike. It's eerie. It's identical. And at the head was a brilliant man who I had the privilege of working for and meeting on a small number of occasions. Aprilia was the best place in my career to work. Brilliant team, great atmosphere, absolutely fantastic. All those things people say about KTM, people said about Aprilia. It was the best motorcycle R&D facility outside of Japan, full stop. Mm. But they spent money like drunks. And it was fine because they made money. The mopeds sold and they made a ton of money. They built a new factory, etc. But at the guy at the top, Ivano Beggio, got a little too cocky and thought, oh, I can do no wrong. You know, our next trajectory is Honda. And they got into big debt. Again, same story, different place. And then the Italian banks called in the loans. There's another side of that story, which is I'm not going to get into on this. That's a separate podcast, because there were allegations of things, financial chicanery and pressures from government and even outside the law to try and shut down Aprilia. Long story short, Aprilia went bust and Piaggio came in and bought it for pennies and then raided it for staff, who the good ones all left to Ducati. If you are appreciative of Ducati's success in MotoGP today, you can thank Aprilia because most of those people came from over there. And the company never recovered. It became a shell, a label that Piaggio shoved its mediocre scooter products through. And I don't believe that's the fate for KTM, because Bajaj are actually smarter than Piaggio. They're bigger than Piaggio. They're better run than Piaggio. They're older than Piaggio on two wheels. So I think the fate of KTM is probably going to be that they're going to get their house cleaned, possibly analogous to when Tata Motors acquired Jaguar Land Rover from Ford, who couldn't make money off of it. And they cleaned house, and they first 4, 5, 6 years of Jaguar Land Rover under Tata were hugely successful. And Land Rover and Range Rover are still hugely successful. Jaguar is a different story, but you know, the bills are paid, the products are developed. More and more of that development is being done in India. And you know, one of the points that your last guest made about how, oh well, you know, not being made in Austria is going to hurt the brand. It isn't. Nobody cares that the latest Land Rover product was, you know, 60-80% engineered outside the UK, that 60-80% of the components come from outside of the European Union. It doesn't matter. If the product design is good, the product market fit is good, the brand matches the product promise, and the price is right, it can succeed, and nobody cares where it's made. I mean, Triumph entire production is outside the UK, hasn't hurt them a bit.
We truly are in the age of brand, aren't we? I mean, it matters more than anything, and yet we, you know, for a long time, and you alluded to this, is that we would associate certain brands with certain countries. And just last week, I rode a Multistrada V4, and you and I both have 90s Ducatis, so we're
insane.
We're insane and gluttons for punishment. But it's very interesting to ride a modern Ducati because it's, I mean, it could have been
motorcycle.
It's a great bike. Could have been, but it could have been a Yamaha,
yeah,
or Honda. I mean, these notions of particular characteristics only coming from certain countries, which was a valid statement up until a certain point, up till 20 years ago. Is that no longer the case, do you think?
It absolutely is no longer the case. You know, as recently as the 1990s, and you know, the motorcycle industry is always about a decade behind the car business. As recently as the 1990s, um, an American car was an American car. It was distinct. You got into a Ford Taurus or a Chevrolet Malibu, you know, everything about it, the scales of components, the wheel diameter and size, the suspension type and ride quality were very distinct from a Ford designed in Germany and manufactured in England for European markets, or a Opel, which was part of GM, versus a Chevrolet made in Detroit. And I'm not going to sit here and say one was better than the other, although I think that's pretty clear. But they were different because there were, the expression was horses for courses. American roads are different, European roads are different. All these tropes. The reality is that they were all tropes. We've had world cars. A Ford Escort was a Ford Escort everywhere, whether it was South Africa or South Carolina, with minor changes. And the end of the day, humans are really not that different. Japan proved that. They don't make really distinct products for distinct markets. I mean, they didn't for a long time. When they did, they were superficial changes, and they conquered the automotive and motorcycle landscape. So, brand is everything, but what is brand? Brand is not marketing. Brand is what other people say about you, which can be influenced by marketing, but it is a combination. It is the marketing, it is the product, it is your history, whether you care to embrace it or you choose to ignore it. It is the dealerships. It is all of those things combined. And, to your earlier point about a Ducati, like Ducati wrapped itself in the Italian flag in the Texas Pacific Group era, the 90s, early 2000s, and they had these amazing, visually amazing, orally amazing products that were actually terrible motorcycles. And that allowed them to go from 10, 15,000 bikes a year to 40, and then they couldn't break past that. And what has allowed Ducati to grow is making the tent bigger, having a multinational engineering and design and marketing organization. Yes, they are heavily influenced by Italian culture. Yes, there are a lot of Italians there, but not exclusively. And as you said in your last podcast, they're owned by Germans. And what does that even mean? If you really peel back modern corporate structure, it's multinational, and the components are multinational, and the suppliers are multinational, and that's good. It means that Panigale is reliable. It means that Triumph built in Thailand is the best Triumph that company has ever produced, going back to the origin of the company. Nobody seems bothered that Royal Enfield, a very popular brand, selling over 1 million motorcycles, numbers Harley Davidson could only dream of. It's Indian. Yes, they have an R&D facility in the UK, but it's an Indian company. The products are manufactured in India, but it's an old British legacy company that was, a company that made weapons in England for centuries, and the two are disassociated. People care about the thing right in front of them. What is this? Do I like it? Does it match do the values of this product and this brand match mine? And if the answer is yes, and the price is okay, they don't really care where it comes from. And if it has, a Union flag on it because it's nominally British, or an Italian flag, or it has stars and stripes. I drive a Ford right now, which was made in Mexico and has Chinese batteries and, God knows what else. I don't think of it as an American car. I think of it as a Ford, and it's very good at what it does. And I'm in the majority.
Let's take a short break for a few words from our sponsors. Picture this: you're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing farther than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking, you know what? I could probably use some new brakes, a shock. Well, this baby deserves a new air filter. So you head straight back to eBay. You can find any part you need there. It's unreal. From headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've had in your mind. eBay is the stock garage of your dreams, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. Because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods are always intense, so you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and that is, of course, riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's why you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back in the road. And now you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see the green check, you're a click away from that part, clicking perfectly into place. Now that you know this, just imagine standing at that open garage door looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger, Defend, and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design, with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis, fully seam-sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing, and D30 CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing. Now back to my conversation with Michael Uhlarik. The Lowdown Show is presented by adbrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. What do you think Bajaj will do to right this ship with KTM? How do you think that they will do it? Will they be sort of heavy-handed and make radical changes, or will the changes sort of take place behind the scenes, and that KTM's branding will continue as before? And what do you envision?
So I think it's pretty clear that, like, Bajaj Auto is worth $30 billion. It's colossus. So, this is not like it's important to them, but, this is all going to be back office stuff. To the dovetail with the conversation you had with your guest, with Brian last week. This isn't like someone writes a check. They negotiate a deal like I'm selling you a used car. It's layers upon layers of milestones. If KTM meets these milestones, it unlocks the next tranche of money, and that money is pre-allocated. This much goes to suppliers, this much goes to debt, etc. So the total end price won't be known for a long time. So the first 3 to 9 months will be just going through it all, slowly, methodically, with third-party banks and financial services companies that will peel it apart. And what Bajaj will do is they're going to find a lot of pieces of this company that are worthless to them and sell them on, or not include them in the acquisition. And then they're going to do a top to bottom audit of, after the financial audit will be a top to bottom audit of people, of material resources, but also of market potential. So consultants like myself are going to make a lot of money. Sadly, not me personally.
Get in there, get a part of it.
Unlikely. Are going to make a lot of money, pulling this apart and trying to find the value. And that's what Wall Street calls it. That's what finance calls it. They're going to try and find the best fit. And then, presumably they have a high level strategic plan. Like they're going to bring, the Bajaj Dominar or, other models into Europe and eventually North America if we decide to start buying motorcycles again. And the two will merge, they will blend, and it'll be the best of both worlds. And, some of those divisions at KTM, like Kiska, will probably be integrated. Others will not. And I suspect things like WP suspension will be spun off, or, because it's just not cost effective. But this will be a multi-year transition. Not unlike trying to think of a motorcycle industry analogy, but yeah, I guess not unlike, Aprilia being absorbed by Piaggio. That's not a great analogy because they did such a terrible job. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to absorb companies. Look, BMW tried to absorb Husqvarna, did a terrible job, lost a lot of money, lost a lot of hair,
Right.
and sold it for nothing. But yeah, this will be painful, at least for the first couple of years.
Do you think that other manufacturers are looking at this with a degree of wariness? And is any other or are any other brands vulnerable and susceptible to the sort of malaise that KTM has gone and is going through?
Oh, for sure. What happened to KTM can happen to anyone. They had some leadership challenges for sure, but every big organization does. It's hard. What needs to be underscored is automotive, and I mean motorcycle and car, automotive is a super competitive, small margin industry. There are unicorns like Harley Davidson, 1990-ish to 2008, the Great Recession, that defy financial gravity, and are charging 25 to 40% gross margin on low R&D products. That's not normal. In the 140 years of mobility, the mobility business, whether it's 2 or 4 wheels, the margins are slim. You're doing well if you're netting 6-8 points, 6 or 8%.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
so the premium sector is like, oh, our gross margins are 20+%. Yeah. And then you look at the books at the end of the year and it's more like 14, 15, which is still amazing. But it's not like selling socks where your margin is 100%, and a lot less stressful to engineer a sock than it is to make a competitive motor vehicle. So to answer your question, I think legacy manufacturers, the ones that aren't part of bigger groups, BMW Motorrad is fine. It's part of an automotive firm, but let's be fair. BMW Automotive, like BMW, their future is by no means secure. If Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz are nervous about existential, being alive in 10 years, BMW, which is a much smaller, compact organization, has got to be thinking the same thing. We're not, to say nothing of MV Agusta, or Triumph. Triumph is a private company. We don't know their finances. How leveraged are they? We don't know. What is their profitability? Not really clear. So others will fall. And we are in a general consensus. We are entering a period of consolidation. And, there are over 100 mainstream motorcycle brands in China. There are more than almost 10 in India. And then when you account for newcomers, it's a large and very dynamic space. It costs a lot of money to develop a motor vehicle. It costs a lot of money to keep the company going and stay competitive. And then you've got giants like Honda and Yamaha and TVS and Hero and CF Moto and Yadea, who their financial rounding error is the annual total budget for Ducati or Triumph.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a tough road to hoe. So for sure, I don't know who's next on Death Watch, but this one caught us off guard. We did not expect this. The growth story at KTM over the last 6-7 years has been amazing. So it's very likely that there could be another failure in the coming year or two.
Is it conceivable that all of and I hate using this term, but I don't know what else to say, which is these so-called legacy brands, the Euro brands and Harley, and I don't know what else is in there. But is it conceivable that they will all be owned, if they survive as a brand at all, that they will all be owned by Chinese and Indian companies?
I mean, conceivable, yes, unlikely. Private equity will come in and take a bunch of them. That's the real threat. The only, I mean, this is also conversation for another, or fodder for another conversation, but I don't think that there's any other way for Harley Davidson forward other than private equity. As a publicly traded company, they're running out of options. They're not that far away from a KTM scenario. Why would a Chinese or an Indian buy? Why buy a European legacy brand or Harley Davidson if there's no path to profitability? And the answer is ego. And that's what caused these sales in the past. You'd have a leader at either a P&E, a private equity firm, or of another, like, the best example is Ferdinand Piech, who was the CEO and chairman of Volkswagen Group. Why did they acquire Ducati? Because he wanted MV and he didn't get it. Initially, Mercedes-Benz had its hooks in it, and then, and it was just this like bitterness. Like BMW has a motorcycle. Mercedes was briefly intertwined with MV, and it was like, we need a motorcycle company. And he loves Italy. I mean, he forced the group to buy Lamborghini, which has probably never made a penny in its 50 years of history. So it's ego of a leader, of an influential person at the leadership level who's just like, I want it and we can afford it, so let's go. Or it's private equity that sees the value in breaking it up. So if I go back to the Harley analogy, the value of Harley Davidson is the name and Harley Davidson Financial Services, HDFS. So, buy the sum, break it up into pieces. Harley Davidson stock shoots up, fantastic. HDFS is spun off with some special relationship with Hogs so that it can continue to finance, to sell subprime loans to Harley buyers. Make money on both sides of that trade, and then, licensing, spin that out into a separate brand. I mean, this is what happened to Marvel, when they were in trouble, is they sold off pieces of their business. And, it kept them alive. So I suspect that that's the only way we're going to see acquisitions and mergers happening with legacy brands. But legacy brands come with legacy problems, like old factories and warranty, exposure to warranty liabilities. Like, coming back to the Bajaj, like, they have to deal with the melting camshafts. They have to deal with the terrible reputation dealers have. And it's not the dealer's fault. Like, the dealers were struggling with inability to get a straight answer from KTM, and distributors are unhappy. Like, it's a big mess reputationally. And that costs money. It takes time. You have to hire people. You have to win back that trust. Ducati, it was Invest Industrial who acquired Ducati from TPG that had to clean up. And they worked hard and they spent large, and it worked out. Invest Industrial, as their name suggests, invested in industry, in the boring, unsexy business of R&D and finance, and establishing spare parts and rebuilding relationships with dealers and suppliers. And then they sold to VW for big bucks. So, I think memory serves, it was like 3.5 billion euro, unheard of for such a small company. So KTM was overvalued. KTM was over leveraged. They had too much debt. And they had built an edifice that they could no longer support. And it remains to be seen if there are other companies, legacy companies, in the same boat.
With companies like CF Moto or Bajaj, does it interest them how they are perceived in the West? Do they care about having a profile in Europe or the Americas?
Of course, they care about making money.
Mm.
And this is where, I've had this conversation so many times. I think I've had this conversation today with a client.
It was actually with your cat, but
yeah. It was right. It was with Roger.
Carry on.
But the reason why we're so bad at this, and by we, I mean West, is not the traditional West. It's not really good at building motorcycle mobility businesses. We're occasionally good at making great motorcycles, but not great motorcycle businesses. is because we conflate passion with success. I'm a passionate motorcyclist. You're a passionate motorcyclist. 99% of the people listening or watching this fall into that category. I have a portrait behind me there of a Java 350 because my dad had one, because it's a cool bike. It's in the family. My dad had a bike. Your dad had a bike. That doesn't make us good at business. Like, it is a business. It has to be. And Honda is the world's #1 motorcycle manufacturer for a simple reason. They're a great product manufacturer and retailer. And and sometimes they make eye-wateringly beautiful, magical, emotional, powerful motorcycles and cars. But most of what makes Honda, what allows Honda to be #1 is they just make a better mousetrap. And that's what it is. TVS and Bajaj, and less so Hero, but certainly, Royal Enfield. How does Royal Enfield go from 40,000 to 1 million units in 12, 13 years? That's unprecedented growth.
How did they do it?
They made a better motorcycle. They took their bike, discovered, thanks to some help and external and, friends and ex-colleagues who helped. And it wasn't just them, but, to say, there's something magical about this bullet that people like. There was, luck, timing, like, the retro roadster thing was coming on song, and, they didn't have a retro bike. They had an old motorcycle that they were still making. And they used the tools of business, finance, organization, strategy, to hire good engineers, to get good vendors, to build a plan, execute on that plan, the boring, ugly stuff of day-to-day operations, so that a Royal Enfield motorcycle today has all the goodness and excitement and passion and history, but it's reliable and it has good dealers, and it's, all those, and they make money and they're profitable. And when you have that, then you get to do the fun things. You get to do the race program. You get to do the sports car or whatever. KTM we're all about the special vehicles, and like took their eye off the ball, which was, motocross bikes had to be profitable. That's where they made their money. And for everyone that says that they were superior, I beg to differ. Superior how? A couple of kilograms lighter, slightly better suspension for 30% more cost? I'm not sure that there's a business school graduate in the world that would say that that's a better business model, or that they were a better product. So I think that's the challenge. And I think BMW, as European legacy companies go, BMW understands that challenge. Piaggio from time to time gets it right. Triumph very much so, depending on if their books are okay. And like I said, we don't know that. Harley Davidson has had moments where they got that formula right.
Let's end it with something fun. And you mentioned racing as something fun, and I am a dedicated MotoGP follower. And KTM is very active in the World Championship, and they make
at all levels
a Moto3 bike, and they rebrand the spec bike in Moto2, and of course they have their own bespoke racers in the Premier class.
Yeah.
What is Bajaj's appetite for spending tens of millions of euros to go around circles?
Probably pretty close to zero. Their finance team is going to be looking at the books and saying, they're going to be savage with the budget, like really, really harsh. And they will have some racing. I suspect what's sacrilegious and protected absolutely is Dakar. They're going to keep doing the Erzberg rodeo and all that stuff. They're going to, in my opinion, I don't know this, but I believe they're going to double down on what made KTM in the first place. Off-road adventure, the sort of, extreme sport aspect that people love about KTM. Road racing makes no sense for that company, like none. And the comment that like, imagine like South Asia, like India and China and Southeast Asia, they care a lot about MotoGP because for the same reasons we do. But they buy that the value to a Honda or the value to a Yamaha of spending all that money to go around in circles is that it helps sell 150cc underbone motorcycles in Malaysia. Nobody is buying KTM products in any significant, meaningful volumes in those markets. And if they were to buy KTM products, KTM doesn't currently make products that match those markets. The world's largest, top 6, top 8 largest markets. Southeast Asia, South Asia, Latin America. What a Mexican person wants is a 250cc commuter bike with a little bit of a style. Sounds like a Bajaj to me. Does not sound like a KTM.
What about rebranding the road race teams as a Bajaj? Why not have their own? Because they sell.
Well, see, you nailed it. That's the right answer.
In closing words from eBay Motors. Picture this: you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay, because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brake rotors, lights, entire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.